Have you ever noticed that you can feel like a completely different person depending on who you're with? Around one person, you breathe deeper, your shoulders drop. You don't have to think so hard about what you're saying. You don't have to manage the room. You don't have to perform. You just exhale. And then there are other people where something completely different happens. You find yourself explaining, monitoring, overthinking, trying to figure out what they're feeling, trying to make sure they're okay. Maybe you're not even consciously aware that you're doing it, but your body knows. And what if that's not just personality? What if that's your nervous system responding to relationship? Today, I want to take our conversation about co-regulation much deeper because you were never actually designed to regulate everything alone. But there is an important distinction between being connected to another person and losing yourself in the process of connection. And I think that distinction may change the way you understand some of your relationships. Welcome to Healing Beyond the Symptoms, the podcast that helps people discover the root causes of their health struggles and take back control with science, strategy, and self-awareness. I'm Dr. Leah Hahn, a chiropractor and functional wellness doctor who believes that true healing starts beneath the surface. So let's dive in. As I've continued to learn and explore the emotional and relational dimensions of healing, I've become increasingly fascinated by something we don't always talk about when we talk about nervous system regulation. We don't regulate in isolation. We regulate in relationship. And sometimes the very relationships we think are supposed to make us feel safe are the relationships that keep our nervous system working overtime. So today, we're going to explore why that happens, what co-regulation really means, how it can become confused with people-pleasing or emotional caretaking, and what it means to experience genuine relational safety without abandoning yourself. Let's start with something incredibly important. Human beings are relational. We are wired for connection. And I think that's easy to forget in a culture that places so much emphasis on independence. We're constantly hearing messages like, you need to regulate yourself. You need to work on yourself. You need to become emotionally independent. And there's certainly value in developing the ability to regulate ourselves. But there's a problem when we take that idea too far, because humans don't develop the capacity for regulation completely on their own. Think about a newborn baby. A baby doesn't have the cognitive ability to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, but I know this feeling will pass. I'm going to take some deep breaths and remind myself that I'm safe. They can't do that. They depend on another nervous system. Someone picks them up. Someone makes eye contact. Someone speaks in a soothing voice. Someone rocks them, someone feeds them, someone helps their little nervous system come back towards safety. That is an early experience of co-regulation. And over time, through thousands and thousands of relational experiences, we begin developing our own capacity for regulation. So when we talk about nervous system health, we can't completely separate the individual from the relationships they're living inside. Our nervous systems are constantly receiving information from the people around us: tone of voice, facial expression, body language, proximity, touch, rhythm, presence, absence. And sometimes before our conscious mind has even figured out what's happening, our body has already responded. You've probably experienced this. You walk into a room and immediately know something feels different. Someone says, I'm fine, but everything about their body says otherwise. And you feel yourself shift. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tighten. You become more alert. You start wondering what's wrong. That's not necessarily you being overly sensitive. That's your nervous system gathering information. And this is where co-regulation becomes really fascinating, because the goal isn't to become so internally regulated that nobody else affects us. That's not realistic. The goal is to become grounded enough in ourselves that we can participate in relationship without losing ourselves inside of it. Now, this is where I think the conversation gets particularly important for women, because many women are incredibly attuned to other people. We notice. We notice the change in someone's voice. We notice when someone walks into the room differently. We notice when our partner is quiet. We notice when our child isn't acting like themselves. We notice when someone is uncomfortable. We notice when someone is disappointed. And that kind of attunement can be a beautiful quality. It can be empathy. It can be compassion. It can be relational intelligence. But sometimes there's a fine line between attunement and hypervigilance. Attunement says, I notice you. Hypervigilance says, I need to monitor you so I know whether I'm safe. Those are very different experiences. And sometimes we don't realize we've crossed that line. We just think, I'm good at reading people, and maybe you are. But I want you to ask yourself a different question. Why do I need to read people so carefully? Do I enjoy understanding people, or do I feel responsible for maintaining emotional stability around me? Because those can look remarkably similar from the outside. A woman might say, I always know when my partner is upset. And perhaps she does, but then we might discover that she has spent years monitoring his or her mood because she learned consciously or unconsciously if she or he's upset, something bad is coming. So her nervous system becomes exquisitely sensitive to every little change, a sigh, a silence, a facial expression, a text message that sounds slightly different. And suddenly she's not simply connecting, she's scanning, she's anticipating. She's trying to get ahead of the emotional environment, and that's exhausting. And it can become so familiar that she doesn't even recognize it as stress anymore. She just calls it being caring, or being intuitive, or being sensitive. But your body may know the difference. There's a difference between I can sense what you're feeling, and I need to know what you're feeling because your emotional state determines whether I feel safe. That second one can keep your nervous system working very, very hard. This brings us to an important distinction. Co-regulation is not the same as codependence. Healthy co-regulation means your nervous system and my nervous system can influence one another and we can support one another while remaining ourselves. Codependence begins to sound more like, I need you to be okay so that I can be okay. Or if you're upset with me, I have to fix it. Or if you're unhappy, I've done something wrong. Or if I set a boundary and you don't like it, I need to change the boundary. And this is where the concept of boundaries becomes incredibly important because boundaries aren't about disconnecting from people. They're about remaining connected without abandoning yourself. So think about that. You can love someone and still say no. You can care about someone's feelings without taking responsibility for their feelings. You can understand someone's pain without fixing it. You can have compassion for someone's nervous system without allowing their dysregulation to become your permanent state. That is a very different kind of relationship. And sometimes one of the most difficult things we have to learn in healing is I can be compassionate without being responsible. That's a powerful distinction. Because if you've spent your life taking care of everyone else's emotional experience, then setting a boundary can initially feel wrong. It can feel selfish. It may feel uncomfortable. It may even make your nervous system more activated. And that doesn't necessarily mean the boundary is wrong. Sometimes it means your nervous system is learning something new. Now let's go one level deeper, because here's something I think is incredibly important. Familiarity and safety are not always the same thing. Sometimes we assume that if we can feel an immediate connection with someone, that must mean the relationship is healthy. We call it chemistry. We call it spark. We say, I just feel like I've known them forever. And maybe that's wonderful, but sometimes what feels familiar isn't necessarily what's healthy. Our nervous system develops expectations. We learn patterns. We learn what relationships feel like. We learn what conflict feels like. We learn what closeness feels like. We learn whether having needs feels safe. We learn whether saying no threatens our connection. We learn whether vulnerability is met with compassion or rejection. And sometimes the nervous system becomes very comfortable with a pattern simply because it recognizes it, not because it's good for us, because it's familiar. That's why sometimes a healthy relationship can initially feel strange. Imagine someone who's accustomed to relationships where they have to constantly prove themselves. They meet someone who is consistent. That person communicates clearly. They don't play games. They don't disappear. They don't make the other person guess. And they don't require constant emotional management. And instead of immediately feeling peaceful, the person may actually feel uncomfortable. Why don't I feel the intensity? Is there something missing? Why does this feel so unfamiliar? Because sometimes chaos feels like chemistry when your nervous system has learned to associate uncertainty with connection. And I want to be careful here because I'm not saying every intense relationship is unhealthy. And I'm not saying that every calm relationship is healthy. But I am saying that intensity is not the same thing as safety. And familiarity is not always the same thing as health. Sometimes healing means learning to recognize a new kind of relationship, one where you don't have to earn your place, one where you don't have to monitor the other person's mood, one where you can disagree without fearing abandonment, one where you can say, that doesn't work for me, and still remain connected. That is relational safety. So what does relational safety actually look like? I don't think it means that you never experience conflict. In fact, I think that's an important decision. So what does relational safety actually look like? I don't think it means that you never experience conflict. In fact, I think that's an important distinction. Safety doesn't mean you never upset me. Safety doesn't mean we always agree. Safety doesn't mean this person never triggers anything in me because we're human. We're going to misunderstand each other. We're going to disappoint one another. We're going to have difficult conversations. We're going to bring our own histories and sensitivities into our relationships. So perhaps a better definition of relational safety is I can be myself here. And when something goes wrong, there is a pathway back to connection. There's room for repair. There's room for honesty. There's room for boundaries. There's room for vulnerability. There's room for autonomy. And there's room for connection. That's incredibly different from a relationship where you constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells. And here's something else I want you to notice. How do you feel after spending time with someone? Not just while you're with them, but after. Do you feel more like yourself? Do you feel more grounded? Do you feel expanded? Do you feel like you can breathe? Or do you feel like you need to recover? Do you replay conversations? Do you wonder whether you said something wrong? Do you feel responsible for their emotional state? Do you feel smaller? Those questions aren't about judging the other person. They're about becoming curious about your own experience. And that's where healing begins. Not with what's wrong with them, but with what's happening inside of me. This may be the most important piece I want to leave you with. I don't want you to walk away from this episode thinking I need to become completely self-sufficient or I shouldn't need anyone. That's not the goal. We need people. We need community. We need friendship. We need intimacy. We need people who can sit with us when life is hard. We need people who can celebrate us when life is beautiful. We need people who can remind us who we are when we've forgotten. Connection isn't weakness. Connection is part of being human, but healthy connection doesn't require self-abandonment. The goal isn't, I don't need you. The goal is, I can need you without losing me. I can love you without managing you. I can care about you without carrying you. I can listen to you without absorbing everything you feel. I can be connected to you and still be connected to myself. And that, to me, is one of the deepest expressions of nervous system health. So before we close, I want to give you a few questions to take away with you this week. Not questions to analyze other people, but questions to ask yourself. 1, who do I feel like I can exhale around? Who allows you to be fully yourself? Who doesn't require you to perform? Notice those relationships because they matter. 2, who causes me to monitor myself or monitor them? Do you find yourself checking someone's mood, choosing your words carefully, trying to prevent conflict, trying to keep someone happy? Just notice. No judgment, awareness comes first. 3, am I being compassionate or am I taking responsibility? Those are not the same thing. You can care without caring. And 4, can I stay connected to myself while I'm connected to someone else? That may be the most important question of all. Because sometimes healing doesn't mean leaving the relationship. Sometimes it means changing the way you participate in it. Sometimes it means creating a boundary. Sometimes it means telling the truth. Sometimes it means tolerating someone else's disappointment without rushing to fix it. And sometimes, yes, it may mean recognizing that a relationship isn't healthy for you. But the starting point is always the same. Come back to yourself. I want to leave you with this. You were never meant to regulate everything alone. You were also never meant to lose yourself in order to belong. Both things can be true. We need each other and we need ourselves. We need connection and we need boundaries. We need compassion and we need discernment. We need the ability to soften into relationship. And we need the ability to notice when our body is telling us that something doesn't feel safe. Healing isn't becoming unaffected by other people. It's becoming increasingly aware of what happens inside of you when you're with them. It's learning to recognize the difference between connection and caretaking, between empathy and hypervigilance, between familiarity and safety, and between independence and isolation. And ultimately, it's learning that you can stay connected to someone else without disconnecting from yourself. So this week, I want you to pay attention. Notice who you exhale around. Notice where you brace. Notice where you feel like you have to perform. Notice where you feel free to be fully yourself. And then ask yourself one simple question. What does my nervous system already know that my mind hasn't fully acknowledged yet? You don't have to make a decision today. You don't have to fix anything. You don't have to change anyone, just listen. Because sometimes your body isn't asking you to do something. Sometimes it's simply asking you to notice. Thank you for being here with me today on Healing Beyond the Symptoms. Healing doesn't mean having it all figured out, but it does mean becoming more aware and releasing old patterns. And if this episode resonated with you, I would love for you to share it with someone who may need to hear that they don't have to choose between connection and themselves. If you're ready to explore what deeper support could look like for you, if you're curious about your nervous system and how it might be holding things that seem to be stuck, I'd love to connect with you. You can book a wellness consultation at bodyandbalancechiropractic.com and we'll figure out together what your body needs to feel safe enough to change. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review for the podcast. Your reviews help more people discover these conversations about healing, nervous system health, and living beyond the symptoms. And remember, you can love deeply without abandoning yourself. You can be connected without carrying everything. And you can learn to feel safe, not just in the presence of another person, but increasingly in the presence of yourself. Until next time, breathe deep, stay curious, and remember, healing isn't just about changing what happens inside your body. Sometimes it's about changing what your body has learned to expect from connection. Thanks again for joining me today on Healing Beyond the Symptoms. If you've been curious about network spinal, or if you've tried everything else and still feel stuck, I want you to know this. Your body is not broken. It's patterned, and those patterns can change. If you're ready to experience how gentle care can lead to profound transformation, I'd love to invite you to book a wellness consultation at bodyandbalancechiropractic.com. Together, we'll look at what your body needs to finally release, reset, and thrive. Until next time, breathe deep, trust your body, and remember, gentle can be powerful.